Oh, perfect. Well, I guess we can just jump right in. So I'm so excited. I'm so happy I came across your book. Um, I think I came across it on Amazon. So I ordered the book. There are only a few copies left on Amazon, but we can talk about that later. But it's a beautiful book. I'm so happy that the book exists, and I just want to let you know that for Cuban Americans or Cubans outside of Cuba, how important this book is for us to visualize our grandparents, our great grandparents, how our families, enjoyed life, how they saw the world through movies, and how important your book is to us, and especially since there's no way. Uh, it's not easy to get around in Cuba to go around to look at all these beautiful theaters. So just to keep to keep up with the audio part, this is Carolina Sandretto.
Andretto, yes.
Sandretto. And she's the photographer, and she put out a book called Cines de Cuba. I'm super excited to speak with you, and I know our podcast listeners will be super excited to hear about your experiences there. I just have a few questions. The interview won't be very long, but it certainly is exciting. If you just would like to give us some background, and I did read the first page to get some of your background stories. If you just want to give us a little background on what drew you, an Italian photographer, to Cuba, and the history of the project.
Absolutely. So thank you, Brian, for having me. I am really excited actually to be able to talk about this project. And it's very nice for me to hear that it actually really has a meaning, especially for the community of Cuban Americans and, for Cubans spread around the world, because, a lot of Cubans are really around the world. So what an Italian photographer is doing in Cuba? That's actually a very good question. I asked myself that question, quite sometimes, actually, especially in the middle of this very long and quite hard but beautiful project. So I arrived in Cuba in actually 2009 for the first time, and I kind of like escaped because I didn't really see the things that I wanted to see. When you first arrive in Cuba, you see the beautiful people, the beautiful cars, and you see this situation which looks like idyllic. And from the outside, especially as a tourist, I was arriving in Cuba with a group of American photographers. So of course, they're kind of like sheltered in some ways from the hardship of the reality of the island. And so I kind of like escaped from it. And then I went back in 2012. And I guess in 2012, my personal situation also was different. And I decided to have a more profound look at the island, and I started going around it with a friend of mine, a Cuban photographer, who was my guide throughout this project. And to go more deeper on the book itself, I grew up in a small village, actually near from where I'm speaking to you, in Tuscany, in Italy. And in this small village, the best thing that I could do on a Saturday night was actually to go to the movies. And it was also the only allowed thing by my very strict grandmother. And so it was a feast on Saturday night to actually go see a movie that I probably had already seen another couple of times during the school year, of course, because it was remakes of old movies. And so one day, I was going around a small village in Cuba, and I saw this little cinema, and there was this three people coming across the street and walking down with an umbrella, and it was a blazing hot, very typical Cuban day, beautiful and extremely warm. And I just had this feeling of being back into my childhood and being in front of the cinema of the small village in Tuscany. And I just immediately just took one photograph right where I was standing without really even thinking a lot about it. And then I went back to the father of my guide, who used to travel a lot around the island, even in 60s and 70s, when it was actually very hard to do for his work. And I asked him how many cinemas there were around the island, and he said, well, I would say pretty much in every little single town that you see on the map. And so I suddenly realized that there was something there for me, that was kind of like waiting in some ways to be discovered. The fun fact about this book is that when I came back to, I was based in New York at the time, so I came back to recharge and develop my film. And so, I just took a few of these cinemas and I thought, I am sure that someone must have done this work before me. It's impossible that no one actually had this idea before. It's such an incredible piece of culture of the country, and it's so vast and so huge, and there's so many of them from so many different architectural types. But I didn't find anything, not a single pamphlet, not a single anything. The only thing that I found was Carlos Garaycoa, who is a Cuban artist, who did this beautiful art piece called Letra al Censor, which of course takes into account the censorship inside of the cinemas and inside of the culture of Cuba and the politics of Cuba. So actually completely different from what I did, but it was, kind of similar. And I happen to know Carlos, and this is the reason why he wrote the foreword for me of the book. But he was the only one. And so, in some ways, I kind of felt like I found gold. And my main focus on this book was really to give all of these cinemas a home, to stay all together. That was really something that I really was aiming for.
And you have some great photos of indoors of the theater. So it's a different, you get to see the face, and then you get to see like the soul. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. That was one of the things that was the hardest actually to get, was to actually convince the people that were guarding these cinemas to give me the chance to get inside of them. So a lot of people were, afraid that they would have personal consequences of letting a foreigner go inside of a cinema, which I, completely understood. Other people were just didn't really understand, and they were ashamed of the state of the inside of the cinema, so they didn't really wanted me to go back home with a picture of a ruined cinema hall. And I always asked permission, and I actually never tried to get inside of these cinemas without having the permission from the person in charge. I thought it was, better for me as a photojournalist, as an artist, as a human being, and of course, I never wanted anyone to get in trouble for the work that I was actually doing. So yes, there are some insights, very, very hard to conquer actually these insights. So that's why I personally feel that most of them are really special. They were for me, because it means that I also managed to explain my intentions well to the person that was gatekeeping the cinema itself. So it's kind of a point of proudness for me to also have been able, in some cases, to actually get in the inside.
So can I just read the back of this book? Because this is really, really important and fascinating. It says, in 1953, Cuba had 694 cinemas and theaters. Havana alone had 134, more than New York or Paris. In 2014, documentary photographer Carolina Sandretto set out to find and photograph, with a 50s medium format camera, the remaining cinemas from that golden era. This book is the visual document of her journey. So, first of all, you chose to take a camera. It seems like you wanted to tell the story during that time period, and not necessarily from a modern perspective, high definition, camera. So it sounds like you really have put a lot of thought into it on how to match the theaters with the medium. So I really appreciated that.
Sorry. Yeah, I always felt that Cuba has a different time schedule compared to the rest of the world. And I think it's, of course, it comes from, it's kind of like the good part of the time bubble that characterizes the island itself. Although, as we know, there's a lot of very, very bad things coming from this. And I wanted to respect this. I normally use medium and large format cameras inside of my work, generally speaking, but I also really wanted to um, uh, give the time to these cinemas to actually talk to me. And so the best thing that I could find, in some ways to tell the story was a 1950s camera, because it was a time of the cinema. Everything is shot on film. Also for the same reason, because it was, I wanted to have the physical feeling of what it used to be to actually see a movie inside of one of those halls. So, if you look at the book, you see exactly the same quality of image that you would have seen at that time inside of the movie theater while watching a movie. So I kind of like wanted to have this feeling go through the book, and I thought that the technical part of it was actually going to be the best solution for me to achieve this sense of timelessness in some ways.
It's beautiful. Then, to bring in the statistics about how many theaters were in Cuba, that says a lot. It says that they, wanted to participate in the world, and they wanted to, the stories of the movies, they were fully engaged with the world and with that medium. So I really appreciate that you put that in there, because you could easily say, oh, there were only 5 theaters there, this is not a big deal. But like you said, your counterpart said that every little town has a theater, so that means something.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's actually, Cuba was actually one of the first places where, the cinemas were open, back when the cinemas were starting to actually spread as an activity in our society, globally speaking. Because at the time, of course, Cuba was under the influence, the very, very high influence of the United States, and it was basically one of the islands of the Caribbeans where Americans used to go for holidays and also for work. And so, for example, the Cine Majestic in Havana used to have an open roof, so you could actually close or open the roof to actually have the fresh air during the night to come in. So it was, the situation was actually extremely advanced in Cuba regarding the architecture and the quantity. So both the quality and the quantity of these cinemas. There were absolutely a lot of them. I personally think it's because Cubans are so attached to culture, and they're so drawn to culture, and they read a lot, and they love the movies. I used to go around with the USB stick with inside all of the movies of Fellini, and it was like the best gift that I could ever take to anyone's home was the full collection of Fellini's movies with the Spanish subtitles. It was the best of, basically. And so I think it's the fact that Cubans are so drawn to culture that actually made this kind of like number of cinema be so elevated inside of Cuba itself. And it was one of the things that was more fascinating for me, because of course I come from Italy, and we do have a lot of attachment for the cinema and for the movies, but we never had as many movie theaters and cinemas as Cuban has in the past. I think it's really quite an impressive number for any other place in the world, I would say.
What was your impression of how the theaters, since you saw so many, what was your impression of how they're being used today? Do they have any community meetings there? Are they still seeing movies in these theaters? What was your impression of today's?
So up to 2016, 17, there were, I think, 16 halls that were equipped with the digital system to actually continue to show movies, especially around Havana and the bigger cities. Also, and this also because of the film festival that takes place every year, which is extremely important for South America. It's one of the biggest film festivals of South America. Takes place in Cuba every year. So those ones have been modernized, and they are, they have air conditioning and, a Dolby surround and all of the things that we can actually see in the US when we go out to the movies. Some others became actually community centers. Some of them are places where kids have a theater lesson, or they're just spaces where they can take classes outside of class. Some of them are centers for elderly people to actually go and dance or spend time. So some of them are have been given by the state to artists. And those artists are renewing those cinemas and having their studios actually placed inside of them, like the Record in Havana, for example. So some of them are actually really getting back to having a second life. Oh, another thing is dance schools are actually taking over the cinemas because, of course, you have the space and you have the stage, which is, perfect if you have a dance company. So they are fully still part of society. Of course, these kind of situations are more placed inside of Havana and the bigger cities. Outside of the bigger centers of the cities, the cinemas are normally some of them have been transformed into DVD rentals, for example, which is kind of funny if you think about it. But yeah, I think community centers are kind of like popping up in those cinemas outside of the bigger cities. So they are getting a new life. They are being, recycled. So I was actually really very happy about it because it's extremely important to have new endeavors come into this kind of places.
Thank you. So can you tell me how, you said you've been there a few times, so how long did it take for this book? How many, were you there for a couple of weeks? And can you explain what it was like traveling around the island? Because in my experience, it's been very challenging. And then I have another question after that. Okay.
Sure. So the book took 4 years to make, to actually make the photographs. I was there pretty much for a month and a half at the time, 4 to 5 times a year. So, if you combine the time, it's pretty much almost 2 years and a half or something like this. And yeah, as you said, traveling around Cuba is extremely difficult. You can only go around by car, making sure that you have fuel enough from one point to the other, not to stay without fuel. Of course, it's very easy to find places where to sleep because all of the people have home hotels. Or how we call them now, B&Bs. So that's actually very nice because you go and you sleep in the houses of the people that that after you actually talk to and you get to learn, and they have been very useful for me for finding cinemas as well. But yeah, going around the island is always an experience. It's very beautiful. But at the same time, it can be quite challenging, even in a private car. But I would recommend definitely to do it because it's such a wonderful trip to go around Cuba. Absolutely.
Then you mentioned, can you tell me what other projects you've worked on? You mentioned maybe you had a film project, and then what is there anything you can share with your current projects or projects that you would like to do?
Sure. So also in Cuba, I worked inside of the homes, and I photographed Cubans in their homes. That's another book, which is called Vivir Con, Cuba Vivir Con. It's been published now in 2019 from an Italian publisher, but you can find it on Amazon, I believe, in the US. So that was my other big Cuban project. I also did a series of interviews to young Cubans about their dreams and what they expected from their future. And it's called Hopes for the Future, and it's actually online as well. Now I'm working during this year of pandemic. I've been working on the memory of my family inside of my home here in Tuscany, where I've been self-isolating due to the pandemic. And it's a small book that I published that I self-published as an artist book last year in 2020. So yeah, I mean, my career is continuing in a quite different direction in some ways, but you know, for me, both of these books about Cuba have a lot to do with, you know, my memory, my childhood. Cines is absolutely my love story with the image, the moving image, and what I used to be doing when I was a kid around here in Tuscany. And Vivir Con is more something about the family and the way we live inside of our families. And of course, you know, the comparison between our society, in which we are free to go and live alone, and the Cuban society, where unfortunately you do not have the chance to live without your parents, because you know, most of the people don't have the means to actually do so. And so there was this combining of these two aspects of the living together situation between, I would say, Europe and the US and Cuba. So I am continuing in this stream of memory, which always takes me back to what happened when I was a kid. So that's a little bit of what it's actually going on right now.
Yeah, so the Genealogy podcast, we're part of Digital Cuban. We're trying to preserve the church records in Cuba. So it's a very challenging project, but a very rewarding project, because no one's doing that. But so I have a picture I just wanted to share with you, because we went to Tapaste, which there's a church there that's only open, you know, one Sunday a month. Mm-hmm. And there's a theater right next to it. So I just wanted to share the picture with you, because your book made me think of so many things. And then I have a self-critique. So let me just see. You know, it's a podcast, so they won't be able to see it. But let me see if you can see did that show up?
Yes, it looks like you have shared the screen, but I can't see. I can see only oh yes, oh my God, I remember this cinema. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I realized it would never make it in the book because I have a shadow in there, and I was like, I thought it was a great picture, but after seeing your book, I'm like, I learned a little bit. So
yeah, it was one of the hardest aspects of photographing the cinemas, was that, of course, you can only move around them so much. And so there are some of them that are in shades, you know, quite like yours. But, you know, at the same time, I think that these photographs, they really are about the cinema itself. It's like taking a portrait of a person. So, you know, if a certain person has a certain kind of expression, as a photographer, you don't want to change it. You actually want to see exactly that expression that, you know, that the person wants to give to you. And in some ways, that's the way I try to photograph the cinemas. You know, some are crooked, some are like in very good shape, some are not. And in some ways, I think that this whole collection of expressions that I saw on the facades and on the insides of these movie theaters makes the book and makes it so interesting and so fascinating for someone that is looking at this huge body of work. So I really like your picture.
Oh, thank you. So what you didn't see is that was on the side, there was a lot of rubble, like a wall of the theater had fallen down. And you mentioned that people had like they were embarrassed. And a lady came up to us right after I took the photo and said, "Oh, they're restoring that." I could tell she felt embarrassed by that, but I could tell it had been decades. It's not like it just fell over, it's just something that happened, and they're going to deal with it whenever they can deal with it. So I did have a moment after that, and it reminded me when you told me your story.
Yeah, it's very saddening in some ways, because these people that you meet in the streets, I had an old lady telling me that the cinema of her small town used to be all lighted up with lights when she was 17, and it's where she longed to go for, and she used to go with her girlfriends, and she had her first kiss actually in the cinema. So in some ways, I really found the same longing for a past that I had concerning my own personal cinema here in Tuscany from these people. And, the same kind of like attachment to this idea, also, the romantic idea of what the cinema used to be, and the magic of going to the movies, and at the same time a clash with the reality of a country that simply cannot keep up with the number of, generally speaking, buildings that there are in Cuba, and that are, of course, in need of serious recuperation and serious work. And in some ways, that's the cinemas are just part of this like huge number of buildings that would need some serious work, and they are only a part of it. But yeah, I had the same experiences over and over, people coming to me and saying, it used to be amazing, it used to be fantastic, and it's not anymore, and I wish you could see it 20 years ago what it was, or 30 years ago. So yeah, it happens to me. It happened to me quite a lot, actually. So I'm not surprised that it happened to you too. It's quite common. And Cubans are so proud. They're proud of themselves, of their country, of their achievement, and they gotta be. They're one of the most well-educated country in the world, and they are absolutely all of them are incredibly well-educated and incredibly intelligent. So I think it's part of the proudness of the Cuban character in some ways. So I think it comes pretty much with that.
I just had one kind of final question. After looking at your book, I noticed that only a few of the photos have actual people in them, either walking by or in a vehicle going by. And I just wanted to know if that was on purpose, or maybe you just, whenever you showed up, that's the way it was when it showed up. So I just wanted to get your impression of what I saw in the book.
Well, it's kind of like both in some ways. Some cinemas I did have the chance to maybe go back earlier or later, and to actually, have the chance to take another photograph. Sorry, some others I actually didn't. So it was kind of like the moment. But at the same time, it was one of my ideas to abstract as much as I could the cinema itself from the surrounding area and the surrounding situations. That's why you don't really see a lot of cars, because I wanted these cinemas to be, in some ways more international, to really talk about how we used to be around media, how medias used to be something that we used to share together, all together. So we used to all go in a group to the movies, but now we're just dealing with the movies on a smaller and smaller screen every day, and in the solitude of our homes and apartments. So without having the people around it, it made more sense to me to show them that way, because it made more sense towards this discourse of these movie theaters being in some ways an example of a phenomenon that actually happened around the world. Because even in Italy we had a lot of cinemas, but then they've been destroyed, transformed, built into other things. So I didn't want it to be too much about, Cuba. I wanted it to be more about the cinemas. Of course, there are a couple with, the beautiful cars, and some of them with even like people passing around on horses, because they were just so beautiful that I couldn't resist. So I did also make those kind of images. But yeah, the idea was to kind of like abstract them a little bit from the context to make a more global discourse about the fruition of media that we all are experiencing.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, those are all the questions I have. I just want to let you know, I'll probably put this podcast up in a week or so, and I'll just send you the link when it's up there.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to share the link on Amazon in case anybody would like to have this beautiful book for their collection. It's just well made. It's beautiful.
Thank you. I'm really happy that you like it. So you said there are a few copies on Amazon, but I have to say that I was very lucky. The book has been also taken into a lot of public libraries collections in the US. So you can actually have a look at it also in many places where you have normally a Latin American college or university or big center. So that's also something that I'm really happy about. And then for everyone else that maybe is interested into the project and maybe doesn't want the book yet, I have a huge website which is www.cinesdecuba.com, and inside of the website there's actually an interactive map of the island with all of the places where the cinemas are placed, and with the pictures that you actually see inside of the book, and also with a little bit of the story that I could actually gather around about each and every one of the cinemas. So I have been reached by a family that was actually looking for information about the cinema of their ancestors that they used to own right outside of Havana. And so, they asked me, and I was able to actually help them, realize that the cinema was actually still there, and actually one of the ones still running. So, yeah, it's, part of this idea that I have, that this is very important for Cuba, but also very important for the world in some ways. And so this idea of like giving the possibility to everyone to look into this project, even if you don't want to buy the book, it's for me actually very important. And this is the reason why I have this like huge website where you can actually consult. And of course, there's a direct reach for me. So, if anyone has more information about the cinemas, please let me know so I can update the website. That's also, always in progress.
Right.
Sometimes I have emails of people saying, oh, but I used to remember this and that. And, it gets inside of the page of the cinema. So it's live for me. It's in a live situation, and it's part of my very humble contribution of not only taking but also giving back to these places as best as I can by sharing the story of these places in a more peculiar way, one from the other.
That's beautiful. So I might do just a little video since I wasn't aware of that interactive part. Maybe just to encourage people to go visit that, I'll just do maybe like a 60-second recap of the podcast and just, show them how they can find that information.
Absolutely. So I have divided it into different itineraries if you don't want to go, alone in this voyage. And so there is also the itinerary, the itinerary of my favorite cinemas. So you have Art Deco, Art Nouveau, the old ones, the newer ones, the ones from the communist area. So it's an interesting website. So I'm glad if you want to share it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many other discussions that can happen around this topic. So you know, what movies were like in the 50s and then what the movie theaters were like in the 60s. You know, there was a lull in movie production between the 50s and the 60s because of the, you know,
Because of the
changing
change of government.
politics. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There was. I actually read a lot about that. So what happened is that friendly, in some ways, countries were still producing movies that were distributed in Cuba. Italy, France. So, you know, Fellini, Truffaut, all of the neo-realistic Italian and French cinema was widespread at the time. And then what happened during the late 60s and beginning of the 70s was actually the distribution of South American movies. So Colombian movies, Venezuelan movies, and Argentinian movies. So it was very interesting because in some ways, Cubans were not, of course, they were out of the American circuit of movies, but they were inside a whole different circuit of movies that were arriving in Cuba that were absolutely fascinating and very interesting, and of course of extremely high quality, as we know. So they kind of like underwent another influence in what they actually had the chance to see. But they did see a lot of movies, a lot of movies anyway. What one can say about this is also that unfortunately, with the change of government in 55, a lot of movie theaters were already closed at that time, and then they stayed closed for some time, and then they actually reopened back in the 60s when, you know, probably the government found the money to actually reopen all of these structures. So there was a little bit of a rumble and change, but you know, even the younger people from my generation, they all went to the movies, you know, anyways, even if they didn't see, you know, James Bond and Disney movies, but they did go to the movies. So that's also really extremely fascinating about this story of the cinemas.
It is absolutely fascinating. So I just wanted to thank you for your time and thank you for being patient with us to get the podcast recorded. And I'm super excited to share this book and the stories. So again, thank you. And I can't wait to see, you know, the other projects that you mentioned and, you know, see what comes out in the future. And hopes for the future sounds very interesting to me. So
thank you so much for having me, Brian. It's really, it's a pleasure and it's an honor to be able to talk to your community of Cuban Americans that I really cherish a lot. And yeah, I am here. I am on Instagram. The website is live and it's communicating with me. So, you know, whoever has questions or wants to get in touch, I am definitely here for all of you guys. So
thank you so
so
much
much for having me.
Thank you. You may hear from me again, you know, with some of these other topics. So
Absolutely, whenever you want, I'm here.
and I'm in Washington, DC. So if you're ever in
Oh,
Washington, DC, let me know.
sure,
So
definitely. We'll organize something as soon as we can travel back again.
perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure.
I love your book. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.